My whole life I've been a fraud. Pretty much all I've ever done all the time is try to create a certain impression of me and other people. It's a little more complicated than that, maybe. I tried analysis. It didn't really work, although it did make everyone sound more aware of their own problems. Putting in all this time and energy to create a certain impression and get approval or acceptance that then I felt nothing about because it didn't have anything to do with who I really was inside. And I was disgusted with myself for always being such a fraud, but I couldn't seem to help it. I know this part is boring and probably boring you, by the way, but it gets a lot more interesting when I get to the part where I kill myself and discover what happens immediately after a person dies. The analyst I saw was okay. He was a fairly good listener and seemed interested and sympathetic in a slightly distant way. And yet I wanted help and really was there to try to get help. I didn't even tell him how unhappy I was until 5 or 6 months into the analysis, mostly because I didn't want to seem like just another whining, self-absorbed yuppie, even though I think even then I was on some level conscious that that's all I really was, deep down. I told him I wasn't blaming anybody for my being a fraud. Nobody'd ever done anything bad to me. Every problem I ever had I'd been the cause of. I was a fraud, and the fact that I was lonely was my own fault. Of course, his ears pricked up at fault, which is a loaded term. I also admitted to Dr. Gustafsson some of the ways I'd been jerking him around early on and trying to make sure he saw me as smart and self-aware, and said I'd known early on that playing around and showing off an analysis were a waste of time and money, but that I couldn't seem to help myself. It just happened automatically. I told him that was maybe a little simplistic, but basically accurate. I seemed always to have had this fraudulent, calculating part of my brain firing away all the time. He leaned back in his loud chair and paused as if he were thinking hard. I know that you know as well as I do how fast thoughts and associations can fly through your head. This is a paradox that many of the most important impressions and thoughts in a person's life are ones that flash through their head, so that fast isn't even the right word. They seem totally different from or outside of the regular sequential clock time we all live by. The internal head speed or whatever of these ideas, memories, realizations, emotions, and so on is even faster. By the way, exponentially faster, unimaginably faster. When you're dying, in reality, the cliche about people's whole life flashing before their eyes as they're dying isn't all that far off. Once again, I'm aware that it's clumsy to put all this way, but the point is that all of this and more was flashing through my head just in the interval of the small, dramatic pause Dr. Gustafsson allowed himself before delivering his big reductio ad absurdum argument that I couldn't be a total fraud if I had just come out and admitted my fraudulence to him just now.
How is it that you were able to drop this far into manipulation and be honest with me a moment ago about who you really are?
So it turned out I'd been right in predicting what his big logical insight was going to be. And although I played along with him for a while so as not to prick his bubble, inside I felt pretty bleak indeed, because now I knew that he was going to be just as pliable and credulous as everybody else.
You'd understand if you'd had as trying a day as I've had.
The kind of day you've had. Lord, if I hear one more yuppie snivel about his inability to love, I'll smack him.
Which indicated that they, and so by demographic extension the whole national audience at home as well, recognized what a cliche and melodramatic type of complaint the inability to love concept was. And sitting there, when I suddenly realized that once again I'd managed to con myself, this time into thinking that this was a truer or more promising way to conceive of the problem of fraudulence, and by extension that I'd somehow deluded myself into believing that poor old Dr. Gustafsson had anything in his mental arsenal that could actually help me, and that the real truth was probably more that I was continuing to see him partly out of pity, and so that I could present myself that I was taking steps to becoming more authentic. I'm compressing a huge amount of what took place in my psyche, that next to last night, all the different realizations and conclusions I reached as I lay there in bed, unable to sleep or even move. Although to you, I imagine it probably doesn't seem compressed at all. You're thinking, here's this guy going on and on. Why doesn't he get to the part where he kills himself and explain or account for the fact that he's sitting here in a piece of high-powered machinery telling me all this if he died in 1991? The reality is that dying isn't bad, but it takes forever. And that forever is no time at all. It won't hurt, though. It will be loud and you'll feel things, but they'll go through you so fast that you won't even realize you're feeling them. The truth is, you already know what it's like. As though inside you is this enormous room full of what seems like everything in the whole universe at one time or another, and yet the only parts that get out have to somehow squeeze out through one of those tiny keyholes you see under the knob in older doors. Because what if afterward, now each moment itself is an infinite sea or span or passage of time in which to express it or convey it, and you don't even need any organized English? Because listen, we don't have much time. What exactly do you think you are? The millions and trillions of thoughts, memories, juxtapositions, even crazy ones like this you're thinking, that flash through your head and disappear? What if there's really no movement at all? What if this is all unfolding in the one flash you call the present? This first infinitely tiny split second of impact when the speeding car's front bumper's just starting to touch the abutment, just before the bumper crumples and displaces the front end, and you go violently forward and the steering column comes back at your chest as if shot out of something enormous? Not only your whole life, but every single humanly conceivable way to describe and account for that life has time to flash like neon-shaped into those connected cursive letters that businesses, signs, and windows love so much to use through your mind all at once in the literally immeasurable instant between impact and death, just as you start forward to meet the wheel at a rate no belt ever made could restrain.